There's all of that very overt indoctrination, but I think what's more damaging is the very subtle indoctrination. They'll slip in gender ideology.
Woke ideology about race and gender has spread through much of American society, even the children's book industry, says conservative commentator and writer Bethany Mandel.
It's a pretty toxic way to raise a child, to either peg them as a victim or victimizer.
Mandel is the editor of Heroes of Liberty Publishing. Their children's books have made headlines after their Facebook ad account was locked and subsequently reinstated. Today we discuss what she sees happening in the industry and growing red flags in K-12 education.
Do you want to live in a country where everyone hates the country?
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick. Bethany Mandel, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Thank you so much for having me.
You know, I just read the most amazing book. It's a kid's book, but I learned a ton from it myself. Thomas Sowell, A Self-Made Man.
Yeah, that sounds very familiar.
Well, so you're the editor of this new series of books. It's encountered a bit of controversy lately.
Yeah.
But we'll talk a little bit about that, but mostly I want to learn about these books.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating, beautiful illustrations, beautiful stories, and frankly, as I said, I learned a lot through it.
Yeah, I did too, honestly. So we have a series of 3 books out with Heroes of Liberty. The first one is about Thomas Sowell, Ronald Reagan is the second, and Amy Coney Barrett is the third. And we sort of started this project because we saw a hole in the market, and the hole was like wholesome, patriotic, pro-American, really educational books for children that were captivating. And part of that captivation for kids is the illustrations. The illustrations are really just beautiful and stunning, and were a really high priority for us. I'm a mother of 5, and I'm a connoisseur of children's books as a result. And you know, kids need to be hooked into books with great illustrations, and so that was what we did.
Well, okay, so let's start with, you know, the whole conceptualization of these books. Like, why is this particular sort of picture book, and I understand it's from about 8 to 12s, needed at this point?
So the children's book industry as it stands now is extremely woke. The from the top to the bottom of the pyramid of, you know, how it's kind of like the Schoolhouse Rock, like how a bill becomes a law, how an idea becomes a book. It's woke from top to bottom. So the authors who are able to get contracts sort of ideologically fit this box that is woke, or they can't be authors. And so they pitch books to agents who know what the editors want, and then the editors sort of have to go through the cycle of making sure that these fit the parameters of the dialogue that they need and the agenda that they need in the children's book industry. And so then you sort of follow the book through the editorial process into the publishing houses. And the next step for a book become a sort of a well-selling book is it needs reviews. And so they get lots of good reviews, and the more woke the book, the better the reviews. For well-reviewed books, then they land at the top of the award lists. And then once you get lots of awards from, again, woke award givers, then they sort of land at the top of the recommendations for schools and librarians to purchase in bulk. If you were to put any blame on any part of the industry of sort of what's driving this, it's the educators, it's the librarians and the teachers. And so they have mass purchasing power, and so they buy, you know, the most woke books in bulk, and then the cycle, you know, keeps on perpetuating. So we saw a hole in the market because, you know, for the everyday parent, for content that you don't have to pre-screen, that you know sort of imparts your values, or at the very least, you don't have to pre-read. For me as a parent, I'm happy with a book that I don't have to filter in any way and that I can just read to my kids. But we saw that there wasn't just a market for that, but there was a market for books that were patriotic, that taught children about our country and about these great figures. And the nice thing about the books, sort of using a biography is a really special way for kids to learn, and for me, honestly, personally also, to form a connection with a human being and a person, and then learn about who they were and their morals and everything, but also helps them learn about that time period as well, because they're forming a personal connection with that time period. So, for example, with Thomas Sowell would probably be the best example of the first three. You sort of learn about Jim Crow and civil rights, and you sort of follow him through his life of what it was like to be a Black American from, when he was born until the present day.
Well, and it's very interesting because it obviously covers a lot of ground. Thomas Sowell, thank goodness, is still with us and still writing. It's not a preachy book. It's not trying to tell you how you need to be. It's a story of someone who chose to make their life a particular way.
Yeah, and that's something that I believe in deeply. As a connoisseur of children's literature, I homeschool my 5 children, and we have a literature-based sort of philosophy that we follow in our homeschool, long predating my involvement with Heroes of Liberty, and so I sort of incorporated that belief and that understanding into what we were doing. People think that children are stupid, and they're not. They understand when they're being condescended to, they understand when they're being spoon-fed, and they can handle big ideas, and they can handle serious topics. And so we wanted to treat our readers, parents and children alike, as intelligent human beings, and give them the whole meal. And the nice thing about children's literature, so our age range is between like 7 and 12, I would say. But my 4-year-old takes something from it. He might not eat everything on the plate, but he takes some of the green beans from the Thomas Sowell plate.
There's this culture today, and I think it relates to wokeness and so forth, that you kind of like, in some ways, shelter children from a certain range of things and expose them dramatically to another range of things. But it's the sheltering part. I mean, this book, the Thomas Sowell book, doesn't hide the realities of Jim Crow and the difficulties and this kind of whole realm. And I found that interesting and different from the limited number, having nephews, of children's books that I've seen recently. Yeah,
and so that's another thing that I believe very strongly about, and sort of treating children as human beings. Homeschool philosophy we follow is Charlotte Mason, and so I kind of slip into that dialogue a little bit, but she treats children as born persons. And so this idea that children are capable of, eating the whole meal is part of the idea of how we treat children's literature. And so children understand that there is hardship and that there is difficulty in this world. And I sort of struggle with this when I read any number of books with my children, that's like Aesop's Fables. I would say 80% pretty violent, pretty scary.
Absolutely.
And so one of the first questions that I had when I had my oldest was 3 or 4 years old was, do I really want to be reading this with her? This is scary and this is violent. And what I noticed, and what I sort of talked to other homeschool moms and what they told me, and I've absolutely sort of found this to be true, is they're not scared when they're on your lap. And all of these things, they will eventually become exposed to these ideas, to life and death and all these things. And what better place for them to learn about the difficulties and the injustices of this world than on their mom's lap? And that's the safest sort of entry into the hardness of life. And so, especially with the Thomas Sowell book and going through all of our books, the Ronald Reagan book is also, there's the introduction of the alcoholism of his father in that book, and that's a difficult topic, but that's unfortunately a topic that a lot of children are going to be familiar with in their lives, or become familiar with, the idea of alcohol addiction and dependency. And it's treated very gently, very carefully. We're not going for shock value, but this was part of Ronald Reagan's life story, and it helped shape who he was as a person. And what better way for kids to be exposed to it than very gently, very, very subtly, but on their mom's or dad's lap.